So why is a Trendelenburg sign a problem? So the reason it's a problem is because, like many situations of instability, it creates excessive wear and tear on the tissues, as well as reducing strength, power, and performance. If performed under enough load for long enough, it can lead to abdominal muscle tears, tightness in the quadratus lumborum on the opposite side. That's a muscle, by the way, the muscle in the lower back, on the side of the lower back. It can cause injuries to the ankle, like ankle sprains, knee injuries such as tears to the anterior cruciate ligament. It could be the medial collateral ligament. It can also tear the medial meniscus. It can create hip injuries and also injuries to the lumbar spine, particularly the lumbar discs and facet joints.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast with your host, Leigh Brandon. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and a warm review. And now, here is Leigh, the Radical Health Rebel, with this week's podcast.
Welcome to episode 17 of the Radical Health Rebel podcast. This week's episode is entitled The Top 10 Gym Mistakes. So in this solo episode, I will share with you my top 10 mistakes that I see on a regular basis by exercise enthusiasts when in the gym. I was fortunate enough to be first introduced to weightlifting at the age of 14, and I've been lifting weights continuously and consistently since I was 23, racking up around 4,860 gym sessions. No doubt early on in my workouts, I made some of the mistakes that I'm going to be discussing today. But fortunately for me, my extensive studies into exercise, anatomy, and biomechanics has allowed me to iron out those areas in my own workouts and enabled me to play tennis for the last 18 or 19 years with very minimal injuries. I gained my first qualification in personal training back in 1996. I trained with the CHEK Institute from 2001 to 2007, which included studying integrative movement science. And I also became a strength and conditioning coach in 2008. I've worked in more gyms than I can really care to remember. And I've worked with a wide range of clients, from those with serious lumbar spine pathology all the way up to Olympic athletes. So the purpose of today's episode is not to make anyone feel bad or to shame anybody, but to enlighten people to potential mistakes they could be making and to help people prevent injury and illness from their gym pursuits and to make it more likely they achieve their health and fitness goals, allowing them the opportunity to live a more fun-filled, healthy, productive, fulfilling, and happy life. And I won't just be pointing out the negatives, I will be also providing solutions. So I will start at number 10 and I will work my way up to the number 1 error. So coming in at number 10 is sitting down to exercise. For many years, I've been frustrated when I see people at the gym sitting on a machine to exercise. Now, I would agree in most instances that it is better to do exercises sat down than do no exercise at all. However, I have problems with this, which are, firstly, most people wake up in the morning, they sit down to eat their breakfast, they sit down during their commute to work, sit down at work, go to lunch and sit down and have their lunch. They go back to work and they sit at their desk. At the end of the day, they sit down on the commute home. They arrive home and they sit down and relax in the evening. For most people, that would include watching TV. And then those who do go to the gym, and good on those people for making the effort, sit down to exercise. So do you see the problem there? Now, it is great that those people are making the effort to go to the gym, but I guess the most obvious problem is that if using calories is a goal, and there's going to be more on that later, then you will use less energy sitting down than you will standing up. So that's one issue. Exercising seated on a machine also means that they spend almost all of their working day seated. Now, the main problem with that is that sitting doesn't require that you stabilize your own center of gravity over your own base of support. So if you then face a situation in everyday life where you need to make, or where you need to move quickly or change direction quickly, perhaps to avoid an accident, you don't just need strength or endurance, but you also need stability, balance, and agility that you just will not develop on a machine. In fact, you'll probably reduce your stability, your balance, and your agility by using machines. So there is a better way. Now, as humans, we spend the first 12 months of life developing our nervous systems, our muscles, our joints, but particularly our nervous systems, to be able to stand and walk from an upright position on two legs. It's a very complex piece of software that allows us to walk and run upright. We are the only species that can walk and run efficiently on two legs that doesn't have a large tail behind us to help us to balance that weight. In addition, when the body is supported by an external object like a bench or an exercise machine, the deeper muscles of the abdomen, that are often called the core muscles or the inner unit of the core, are not required to activate, as their job is to stabilize predominantly. But if an external object is stabilizing the body will try to save energy. Now, that's a great thing if you're a hunter and gatherer without any access to supermarkets or nearby farms. But using machines will not activate those crucial inner unit core muscles. Machine training also requires much less neurological activity and coordination than it does to walk into the gym, even if you're using heavy weights. So in almost all instances, when you use a weight machine, you are effectively deconditioning your body. So machine weights at the gym will increase the strength of your big, what we call prime mover muscles, your outer unit muscles, your fast twitch muscles, but not your inner unit muscles, your slow twitch fibers, the ones that help you stabilize the body, or more importantly, stabilize your joints. So with a strong outer unit and a dysfunctional or deconditioned inner unit, if you try to move a weight in everyday life, anywhere near the kind of weight that you lift in the gym on a machine, or if you go for a run, you are at a much higher risk of an injury, as you are, as you're unlikely to be able to stabilize the working joints effectively whilst lifting a load or running, and you're not able to stabilize your joints effectively. Now, machine weights are functional for bodybuilders, as an example, as they do facilitate muscle growth more effectively than free weights. But even then, I would suggest that it's unwise to stick solely to machine weights. One of the reasons why it's not advised to stick solely to machine weights is something called pattern overload. Now, when movements naturally occur, or when we use free weights in the gym, each rep we do is slightly different. So the path of movement differs slightly from rep to rep, even if we can't see any difference with the naked eye. And this is because the body is smart, and it will do all it can do to preserve energy and to move efficiently, and will therefore attempt to recruit different muscle fibers with each rep. This also spares the joints and the connective tissues from becoming overburdened or wearing out just one specific part, rather than sharing the load across different parts. However, when we use a fixed resistance machine, the path of the motion is fixed, often only in one, possibly two planes of motion. And this is what leads to pattern overload, where the specific muscle fibers, joints, and connective tissues are used over and over, which leads to breakdown of those tissues. Another downside to machine weights is that because they rarely allow movement in more than one or two planes of motion and do not cross the midline, they do not help to balance the two hemispheres of the brain, so the right and the left brain. So they have slightly different functions. Crossing the midline during exercise, such as a wood chop type exercise, does help to connect both hemispheres of the brain, which allow for optimal mind-body integration and performance. And talking of planes of motion, we live life in 3 planes: the sagittal plane, which is front to back, the frontal plane, which is side to side, and the transverse plane, which is when we move in rotation. Now, most machine weights only condition in one plane of motion, and most of them predominantly condition what we call the sagittal plane. So that's when we go from front to back or forward and backwards. However, most injuries occur in the frontal and transverse planes, and I'm going to come on to talk a little bit about that a bit later. And many people believe that this is because most people don't condition with exercises in those planes, so they're weak in the frontal and transverse planes. So as I said, I'm going to cover that in a bit more detail later on, and I will also give you my top tips for correcting these mistakes. So in at number 9 is using a treadmill. What did I just say? Using a treadmill? Have I lost my mind? Well, no, I haven't, but that statement does come with some caveats, which I will cover. And as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of people, when they go to the gym, use the treadmill. So what's wrong about using a treadmill? Well, there are a few, in my humble and personal opinion. The first one is that you can walk and run outside. It's much healthier to be outside most of the time. You know, most people living in big towns and cities spend very little time in nature, getting the sun on their skin and breathing in fresh air. Generally speaking, buildings contain much higher levels of toxins than being outside, even in city centres. And that's why we have the term sick building syndrome. And a reason why things like, and this is another reason why things like lockdowns are really not a good idea, because it's much healthier generally to be outside, because when we're inside, we're bombarding ourselves with toxins. Another reason why a treadmill might be a less than optimal choice is because most treadmills use a motorized belt that moves under you. So what's wrong with that, I hear you ask? Well, there are 2 main issues with that. Firstly, because the belt is moving under you, it doesn't require your hip extensor muscles, mainly your glutes, to drive your body forwards as you would if you was on the road or on the track. In fact, it almost does the complete opposite. Your body is actually trying to slow itself down on top of the belt. So if you're using a treadmill to improve running performance, it will actually create a faulty recruitment pattern in your running gait and may actually slow you down when running outside. And that's because running outside will require you to use your glutes to drive you forwards, but it doesn't on a treadmill. Now, if you use a treadmill that isn't belt driven, then you're forced to use your glutes, which is a much better option. So there's a treadmill called the True Form, and that's probably the most well-known self-driven treadmill. I've never used one, but they look pretty good. The second main issue with the treadmill is the type of balance required. So when we move along a stable, predictable surface like a path, a walkway, roadside or running track, or just walking to or in the office or at home, we're using what's known as the righting reflexes. Now, our righting reflexes help keep our ears, our eyes and our head level with the horizon and help maintain our balance and prevent us from falling when we're on a stable, predictable surface. We also have tilting reflexes. Now, tilting reflexes help maintain our eyes, our ears and our head level with the horizon and help us to maintain balance and prevent us from falling from an unstable, unpredictable or moving surface, such as when we're on a moving bus, a train, a travelator at the airport, or it could be when horse riding, skiing, ice skating, or getting in and out of a wet bath, or walking on icy ground. Now, for most of us, we do need some level of righting and tilting reflex ability, and that helps us to prevent from falling. So it is good to train both modalities. However, if you're using a treadmill to improve running on normal ground, but you're running on a belt-driven treadmill, you're training the wrong reflex profile, which may also reduce your performance potential. Another issue I commonly see with people who use the treadmills is how they use the treadmills. Now, what I commonly see people doing is holding on to the rails of the treadmill. Now, this causes another issue. So when we hold on to something, what it does, it downregulates the requirement to use our deep inner unit muscles of the core, which are required for stability. So when someone holds on to the rails of a treadmill, they're not training their body to recruit these vital muscles whilst walking and or running. So what is the knock-on effect of that, I hear you ask? Well, if you're not stabilizing your joints, you will have more compression, torsion, and shear forces going through your joints when you walk or run outside, which will lead to excessive wear and tear over time and increase the likelihood of injury. That's one downside. Another downside is that holding onto the rails will also reduce energy expenditure as less muscles will be contracting. So if someone is using a treadmill to burn calories and then they hold onto the rails because it makes walking or running easier so that they can go further or faster or achieve a bigger number on the display screen, then they've made one step forward and one step back and haven't actually achieved any kind of benefit from holding on. The other thing I almost always see people do is that they hold onto the rails of the treadmill, but they also put the machine on an incline, which I'm guessing is to make it harder so they burn more calories. But when they put the treadmill on an incline and they're holding on, they then also lean back, which completely negates the incline as they're now still perpendicular to the belt, and they're gaining no advantage from putting the treadmill on an incline because they're still walking at 90 degrees to the treadmill. In fact, it's probably a slight disadvantage because they're not perpendicular to gravity, because they're leaning back, so it's now easier and not harder, so they're using less effort and not more effort, which I'm guessing was the desired effect of putting the machine on an incline. Another issue with treadmills in the gym is the electromagnetic radiation being emitted by the display screens that you often find in modern treadmills at the gym. Now, if you're not sure why electromagnetic radiation is an issue, I will be covering that next. Another downside to a lot of modern treadmills and their display screens, as it forces the user to look down at the screen and puts them in a position of poor posture. And again, I will be covering posture in a bit too. But don't worry if you are a treadmill user, all is not lost. I will give you my tips on what you can do instead at the end. So make sure you watch or listen all the way through the episode. Now, coming in at number 8 is taking your mobile phone to the gym. What? I hear you say? No mobile phone? Are you crazy? How will I listen to my music, take pictures of or videos of me working out? And how will I message my friends and keep up to date with what's going on social media or check my emails from work? Okay, I get it. The thought of you being without your mobile phone for 1 hour is stressing you out already. I get it, but just hear me out here. So why am I suggesting not taking your phone to the gym? Well, firstly, most of us today, whether we realize it or not, are addicted to our mobile phones. And addictions are not beneficial things. So this episode will be too long if I go into all the downsides of mobile phone addiction. Maybe that's for another podcast. But there are some other serious reasons to not have your phone with you at the gym. Firstly is the electromagnetic radiation that's emitted from your phone. What many people do not realize is that despite the regulators that regulate the telecoms industry suggest that mobile phones are safe for humans, the regulations were set in 1996 using much older, less sophisticated technology than we have today. And they used a mannequin and not actual humans doing the testing. So, there is much scientific evidence suggesting that these devices are not safe to use at any time, not just in the gym. In fact, this is an area that I've studied greatly, and I've read over 200 scientific papers on electromagnetic radiation and its effects on human health, and also on animal health, and also on plant health, by the way. But I won't go into too much detail here. I'll leave that for another episode. But suffice to say, there is strong evidence relating electromagnetic radiation with reduced immune function, alteration of the gut microbiome, oxidative stress, brain damage, Alzheimer's disease, headaches, dizziness, nausea, chest pain, blurred vision, strokes, pain, skin conditions, cardiac conditions, eye and nerve problems, fetal damage when pregnant women use them, reduced memory, hyperactivity, tinnitus, DNA damage, particularly by 5G technology, and also brain tumors, including gliomas and also lymphatic malignancies. Now, I could list a lot more issues connected to electromagnetic radiation that's been proven by science, but I'm sure you get the point. In addition, when you have a mobile phone near to you, it also makes your muscles weaker. Now, I've tested this many, many times, and every time apart from once, the person tested was significantly weaker when their mobile phone was held close to them and their shoulder strength was tested. So why would you want to be weaker at the gym? So maybe that's something that you haven't considered. Another thing to consider are the earphones that you use. Now, according to a study at York University, wired headsets do reduce radiation at the head significantly, but they note that the wire in a wired headset will still transmit the radiation along your body like an antenna, and the phone still emits radiation in your hand and or near your internal organs. So what that's doing, it's saying that if you use wired headphones when you're having a phone call compared to having a phone next to your ear when you're having a phone call. Now, the other thing to discuss are Bluetooth headsets. Now, the thing is with Bluetooth is that because they're wireless and they give off radio frequencies, those frequencies are going straight into or onto your ear. Now, in both instances, your body is being exposed to the mobile phone radiation from the phone, not just where the phone is, but at the level of your head. Okay. Now, I've tested the electromagnetic radiation, or the radio frequencies, I should say, that's emitted from Bluetooth headphones, and they make my electromagnetic field meter not only go into the red zone, but they go right off the scale. So they give off very, very large radio frequencies. So having them so close to your ear and your brain is really not a good idea, whether you're in the gym or not. But again, don't worry, I will come up with some solutions for you. Now, if you're a health professional and you want to learn more about electromagnetic radiation and the harms to health, you can check out Module 1 of my 4-module course, which is entitled Heal Them Education. That also includes extensive modules on toxins, the microbiome, and hormones. And for more information on that, you can go to my website, which is www.healthemeducation.com. So that's heal, H-A-L, them, T-H-E-M, education.com. Another thing I see a lot at the gym is people spending more time looking at their phone than they do exercising. In addition, most people I see using their phone at the gym do so with terrible posture, most times hunched over like the hunchback of Notre Dame. Call me old-fashioned if you like, but I think the gym is a place where you should go to improve your posture and not make it worse. And again, I'll explain a little more about posture later on in the episode. Now, coming in at number 7 is quad dominance. So what do I mean by quad dominance? So when I say quad, I'm talking about the quadricep muscles that are on the front of the thighs. So quad dominance involves performing exercises that include the legs, where you use excessive amounts of the quadricep muscles and not enough of the gluteus maximus and or hamstring muscles. This often occurs due to weakening of the gluteus maximus and or the hamstrings, or it can be just poor exercise technique. If it begins as purely poor exercise technique, then over time, there will be an imbalance between the strength of your quadriceps versus the glutes and the hamstrings. Now, the sad thing about quad dominance is that most exercise professionals working in gyms, very sadly, are not taught it in their training. So A, they don't look for it, but B, they also don't know how to correct it. It's not necessarily their fault, particularly people that have, only recently qualified. It took me, I think I was probably 7 years into my career before I came along concepts like quad dominance. Okay. So, don't be surprised if your gym instructor at your local gym doesn't know what quad dominance is, doesn't know how to spot it, doesn't know how to correct it. So why is it important to know about quad dominance? Well, if you are quad dominant, what it does, it places an anterior force onto the tibia or shin bone and also the anterior cruciate ligament or ACL. That works to prevent these anterior forces so that the anterior cruciate ligament, or the ACL, as I'll call it from now on, is put under excessive load, which over time can lead to a tear of the ACL, which you commonly hear about with football or soccer players, and has ended or greatly affected many professional athletes' careers. So I tend to see quad dominance occur in exercises such as lunges and squats predominantly. And in fact, I rarely see anyone at my local gym performing these movements without being quad dominant. As we know, ACL injuries are very common, as is quad dominance, and I will give you some tips on how to assess yourself and how to correct it if you are like most people and you are quad dominant. And also, just to note, quad dominance is also more common in females than males. Coming in at number 6 is Trendelenburg sign. A what sign, I hear you say? Yeah, it's a long word. It's called Trendelenburg sign. So what is that, I hear you ask? Well, the Trendelenburg test was first used as a test for hip dislocation, but has become a good assessment tool to test for weakness in the gluteus medius muscle, which lifts the leg out to the side. And that movement is known as abduction. So a Trendelenburg sign occurs when a person has weak hip abductor muscles, which lead to the inability to stabilize the pelvis effectively when on one leg, whether moving or standing still on one leg. What you tend to see with a Trendelenburg sign is the pelvis on the opposite side to the standing leg tilts downwards or drops downwards. If the person had normal strength of the hip abductors, the pelvis would remain level when on one leg. A Trendelenburg sign is commonly seen in gym users when they're walking, running, lunging, or stepping. So basically, exercises where they spend any period of time on one leg. And again, this is seen more commonly in females than males, and there's several reasons why that is, and I won't go into it, but there are several reasons why. So why is a Trendelenburg sign a problem? So the reason it's a problem is because, like many situations of instability, it creates excessive wear and tear on the tissues, as well as reducing strength, power, and performance. If performed under enough load for long enough, it can lead to abdominal muscle tears, tightness in the quadratus lumborum on the opposite side. That's a muscle, by the way, a muscle in the lower back, on the side of the lower back. It can cause injuries to the ankle, like ankle sprains, knee injuries such as tears to the anterior cruciate ligament. It could be the medial collateral ligament. It can also tear the medial meniscus. It can create hip injuries and also injuries to the lumbar spine, particularly the lumbar discs and facet joints. So it really is something you want to avoid doing. Sadly, it is something I see every single time I go to the gym, and it's often, I often see it just walking behind someone walking down the street, and it's very, very common. And again, sadly, most exercise professionals are not taught this in their training, so they don't look out for it. They don't know how to correct it. So you may have a Trendelenburg sign and not know, so you won't even be able to correct it. But I will be giving you some tips and resources a bit later in the episode to assess it yourself and potentially be able to correct it. Now, coming in at number 5 on my top 10 gym mistakes is overpronation. So what is overpronation? Well, pronation means to rotate towards the middle or downwards. So for instance, to pronate your hand, you would turn your palm to face the ground. Other parts of the body can pronate and supinate too. So supinate is the opposite. So that would be turning your palm to face up, like holding a bowl of soup. That would be to supinate. But what I see in the gym is overpronation of the lower limbs, the legs, the feet, the ankles. So overpronation, if not corrected soon enough, can lead to numerous lower limb injuries, including hallux valgus, which is when your big toe bends inwards towards the middle of the foot, bunions, which are normally coupled with hallux valgus, Achilles tendinosis, ankle sprains, plantar fasciitis, anterior compartment syndrome, shin splints, medial cartilage damage, ACL tears, medial collateral ligament tears, chondromalacia patella, jumper's knee, osteoarthritis, quadriceps tendinosis, stress fractures to the femur, and piriformis syndrome. So it's not a dysfunction that you want to be taking lightly. Okay, it's something that you, like the others that I've mentioned, you really want to be preventing these, A, for injury prevention, but also for performance. So I often see overpronation in walking, running, stepping, lunging, and squatting, and sometimes, although less so, even in deadlifting. And remember, when you're deadlifting, you're generally using a very heavy weight. To explain the concept further, let's look at gait, which is the term used to describe walking, running, and sprinting. So when walking and running, there are 2 distinct phases of gait. You have the stance phase and you have the swing phase. So the stance phase is when the foot is in contact with the ground, and the swing phase is when the leg is off the ground and it normally swings from the back to the front position. The stance phase also has 3 distinct phases, although there are different explanations of different numbers of phases, but I'm going to stick to the 3 just to make it simple. You have the heel strike, you have the mid stance phase, and you have the toe off phase, which are pretty self-explanatory. I'm sure I don't need to explain those in any more detail. So let me give you a working example here. Imagine you're walking, and as your foot hits the ground, which we call heel strike, you should ideally land on the outside of the heel. As you take your full body weight on that foot, moving towards the mid stance phase, your standing leg begins to roll inwards or pronate under the load of gravity and your body weight, and then begins to supinate the foot prior to toe off. That leg, after toe off, then goes through the swing phase and the process continues. That's what we call gait. However, if you have overpronation, your foot lands on the outside of the heel, and as you go through the stance phase of gait, the foot rolls inwards too much, and too much weight is now on the medial side of the foot and not evenly distributed across the width of the foot. This places excess stress on the medial side of the entire lower limb. So why does this happen? So why does overpronation happen? Well, overpronation happens due to a combination of potential reasons. Another term that can be used to describe overpronation is what we call medial rotational instability. So medial means to rotate inwards. As we go through the swing phase of gait, the tibia and the femur, so the thigh bone and the shin bone, externally rotate to place the heel in the best position for heel strike, and the tibia and femur internally rotate during the stance phase, and then externally rotate again at the end of the stance phase to place the foot in the best position for toe off. Now, ultimately, overpronation is the inability to control the amount of pronation or internal rotation of that limb. So the question is, what controls the pronation? Well, there are a number of factors. So here I will introduce the role that the pelvis plays too, because it is important to understand. The pelvis can rotate anteriorly and posteriorly on either side, and can move, and normally do move, independently of each other. At toe off, when the leg is behind, the same side of the pelvis is anteriorly rotated, which unlocks the sacroiliac joint, which is the joint between the pelvis and the sacrum. This allows the greatest amount of mobility, which is exactly what you need when propelling the body forwards at toe off. At mid-stance, the pelvis should be in a neutral position and have the same amount of rotation on each side. And at heel strike, the pelvis, so when the foot is forward of the body, the pelvis on that side is posteriorly rotated, which locks the sacroiliac joint, creating optimum stability to absorb the weight of the body through that foot and ankle complex. Now, hopefully you're still with me. So why did I just tell you that? Well, as the pelvis goes into anterior rotation, it's coupled with internal rotation of the lower limb. When the pelvis goes into posterior rotation, it's coupled with external rotation of the limb. So to prevent overpronation, you need to have muscles strong enough to control anterior rotation of the pelvis and interior rotation of the limbs. So which muscles are involved in those tasks, I hear you ask? Well, the muscles that control anterior rotation of the pelvis are the lower abdominals, along with the glutes and hamstrings. The muscles that help to control internal rotation of the femur are the small group of external rotators on the back of the hip and the posterior fibers of the gluteus muscles. The biceps femoris muscles also help to control internal rotation of the tibia when the knee is flexed, and the tibialis anterior helps to control the eversion or pronation of the foot and the ankle. What we must also take into account is the ankle is a slave to the hip, which means whatever happens at the hip will be directly reflected at the ankle, and the knee is a slave to the hip and the foot. So whatever happens at the foot and the hip will be translated to the knee. So the main priority has to be to address the muscles at the hip and the pelvis to control pronation. And medial rotation of the limb. So overpronation is something that I see every time I go to the gym and often see walking down the street. Again, most exercise professionals are not taught this in their training, so they don't know to look for it and they don't know how to correct it. So hopefully you're still with me so far. I hope you are, because what I'm going to do now is give you some suggestions on how you can assess yourself or feel if you are overpronating. And I'll also, well, a bit later on, I'll also give you exercise suggestions on to correct it. But now I'm going to move on to number 4. And coming in at number 4 is posture. The sad truth today is that most people have very poor posture. And poor posture combined with exercise can lead to a number of injuries, many already previously listed. And poor posture also leads to unstable joints. Not only does poor posture increase the likelihood of injury, but it also reduces performance for many reasons. Poor posture, especially the hunched back, rounded shoulder posture, which is technically called an upper cross syndrome, will also affect breathing mechanics, which can lead to physical, mental, and emotional issues, as well as a decrease in performance. A lack of confidence and depression have also been linked to the upper cross syndrome posture, which almost everyone in the Western world has due to prolonged time seated and the use of computers and mobile electronic devices. So it's sad for me when I see people with quite severe upper cross syndromes performing exercises that will make their posture worse and do no to little exercises to help improve it. Injuries of the shoulder are common with exercises with this posture, particularly those that do exercises where their arms go overhead. Other postures, such as a layered syndrome, where people have a flat lower back, they are much more at risk of lumbar disc injuries. Sometimes you might have heard the term slipped disc. It's an incorrect term, but it's the same thing. And, you know, that can be a very serious injury that can take 18 months to 2 years to heal. And that's with the right kind of guidance. The layered syndrome is very common, and most people have no idea that they have a greater risk of disc injuries, lumbar disc injuries, and have no idea on how to adjust their exercises to minimize the risk or how to correct those postures. Another posture which is less common these days is called a lower cross syndrome, where someone has too much curve in their lumbar spine. People are often misdiagnosed as having what is known as a lower cross syndrome, when in fact they have a layered syndrome. This often happens when a clinician guesses or eyeballs the spine instead of using accurate measuring techniques such as inclinometry. I've had a number of clients that have previously been wrongly diagnosed with a lower cross syndrome and treated and made worse by other clinicians. A lower cross syndrome can lead to a number of conditions, including spinal fractures known as a spondylolysis, which can worsen into a complete break known as a spondylolisthesis, which often entraps nerves and can cause sciatica. Sacroiliac joint dysfunction, when you get pain around the sacroiliac joint, is also more common with this posture. Again, most exercise professionals are not trained in this kind of information, so they are unable to assess posture effectively and make adequate suggestions for correcting posture in their exercise program. I will, of course, be giving you a few exercises that you can do, which addresses these dysfunctions, and also exercises that you should avoid if you have these postures. But next, coming in at number 3, is not training the core effectively. So I've already mentioned the core a little bit in this episode, but when I refer to the core technically is everything in the body apart from the arms and the legs. That is the core. so the head and the body. But going a little bit deeper, the core can be split loosely into two sections, the inner and the outer units. And what I'm referring to here is the inner unit of the core. It's the inner unit muscles of the core that help to stabilize the spine, the rib cage, and the pelvis, and therefore they stabilize the upper and lower limbs. These muscles have been shown to activate milliseconds prior to larger, predominantly fast twitch outer unit muscles contracting, again, predominantly in the limbs, so the arms and the legs. So what the inner unit muscles are doing is laying a foundation for the big mover muscles to do their things from a solid and stable base. Hence the saying, you can't fire a cannon from a canoe. So if you've got weak core muscles, then you're not going to be stable and you won't be able to produce optimal strength and power. Most gym users have heard of the core, but I rarely, if ever, see anyone performing any kind of effective core exercises. My experience is that most gym goers think of planks and crunches as core exercises. Now, technically, they are, but they fail to isolate the inner unit muscles of the core, which is often required for most gym goers. As I mentioned earlier, many gym goers use machine weights where no activation of the inner unit muscles are required. So without optimal activation of the core muscles, the spine, the rib cage, the pelvis, and the limbs are not adequately stabilized, which increases the likelihood of injury and reduces performance. Now, if someone's inner unit muscles do work adequately, there is not necessarily any need to condition them specifically. However, in my experience, that is very few people that do have a well-functioning core. Now, of the people I've tested, and I test clients that are obviously coming to me because they've got a problem, but I also test elite athletes and I also test health and fitness professionals. And I would say somewhere between 1% and 5% of the people I've ever tested have a optimal functioning inner unit of the core. Another problem is that most people are unaware of something called viscerosomatic reflex. Now, I'm sure you're aware of the concept of viscerosomatic reflex, but may not have heard it called that term. And what it is, when someone sadly has a heart attack, they often feel pain, in the left side of the body going right the way down their left arm. So that's an example of a viscerosomatic reflex. It occurs when there's an issue with an organ, hence the term viscero, and the nervous system takes the information from the organ and transports that information to the brain, and the brain sends a signal to the same levels of the spinal cord it received the messages from. But instead of sending signals back to the organ, it sends them to the muscles that are innervated by the nerves at the same levels of the spine. Now, what often happens in the abdomen when an organ is inflamed is it tends to inhibit or relax the muscles around the organ so that it doesn't put extra pressure on that organ. Okay, the last thing you want when you've got an inflamed organ is more pressure. Think of, if your bladder's full, the last thing you want is someone poking you in your lower abdomen. So if someone has eaten something that causes intestinal inflammation, which is very common these days, or they have constipation, which is very common these days, or they're premenstrual, which is very common in women of childbearing age, the inner unit muscles of the core will be inhibited, and exercise, except when in life-threatening situations, will not condition those muscles. So if you've got viscerosomatic reflex and you're doing a core exercise perfectly, those muscles still aren't going to be optimally activating, and they won't be conditioning effectively. So not only do you need to do the right exercise with the right technique, with the right sets, reps, tempos, loads, etc., but you also need to make sure that those muscles aren't inhibited. But viscerosomatic reflex if we go into more detail, is really for another podcast, because it is just such a massive, massive topic. But I will cover that in another episode. Now, coming in at number 2 is not changing intensity levels over time. So I'm actually referring to a few things under the same roof here. So firstly, I see that most people at the gym do the same or the similar routine day in, day out, week in, week out. They aim to work out at the same intensity, often using the same weight for each exercise that they've been using for months. Doing this will not result in an improvement and probably not even maintain the level of conditioning. My experience suggests that most gym goers do not carefully consider what changes in intensity they will do from workout to workout, from week to week, from month to month. The question is, are they aiming to improve endurance, muscle size, strength, power, speed, agility, or balance? I'm guessing most people do not gauge how they feel from day to day and adjust their workout accordingly. For instance, if someone completed a big deadlift session 2 days ago and they feel extremely sore and wiped out, do they take the no pain, no gain approach and attempt another big workout, or do they listen to their body and maybe go for a swim or a yoga class? What I'm really referring to here is called periodization. And periodization is the careful planning of changes in intensity and volume over time to focus on different aspects of fitness and to focus on different aspects of fitness during different periods or phases of their training, and also to allow optimal recovery, growth, repair, and increase in performance. And finally, coming in at number 1, the number 1 mistake is not having a clearly defined goal. And that really is an extension of the previous point. So you might accuse me of not possibly being able to tell, whether a person at the gym has a goal or not. And you'd be right. I couldn't be 100% sure. But having spent 30 years in gyms, I can normally tell those that have a goal from those that don't, just from the way that they train. So why is it important to have a clearly defined goal? Well, it's not important, or it's not just important to have a clearly defined goal. It's important to have goals for each exercise, each training session, goals for each week, goals for each phase of training, ultimate goals, and life goals. Goals keep you motivated. Goals, keep you with your eyes on the prize, and keeping your eyes on the prize helps to prevent procrastination and self-sabotage. So it keeps you going on the program, keeps you moving towards really what you want to achieve in life. Also, being clear on your core values is important. Knowing, what you do and don't stand for in alignment with your goals. That's really what I'm talking about with core values. And living your life in accordance with your core values enables you to lead the life you want and the life that you need to live to achieve your goals. Ultimately, achieving your goals will lead you to happiness as long as you set the right goals and core values. So that's my top 10 mistakes, but I want to leave you with my top tips. So my top tips for you are: thanks for watching the Radical Health Rebel YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to share with your friends and family, or share via your social media. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to receive notifications of new video clips from the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode, completely ad-free, plus premium content, and join the Radical Health Rebel Patreon community, head on over to the Radical Health Rebel Patreon channel at www.patreon.com/Radical Health Rebel. Thanks again for watching.